going to attempt to revive a love story that hasn't been properly told since 1847. And as I mentioned in my previous video, it takes place in the little city of Italy called Carignano, with our young and up-and-coming knight, the Chevalier de Bayard, whose grave I'm going to visit this year on April 30th, 2024, to commemorate the 500-year anniversary of his death. I am doing this so you get a better sense of who he was, his character, and what his motivations were. And if this love story strikes a chord with anybody, leave it down in the comments, all right? So without further ado, let's get started. When the Chevalier de Bayard was a young teenager, he finally decides to go from the Chateau Bayard all the way down to the little city of Carignano that is under the rule of Charles I, Duke of Savoy. He was about 5 years older than Bayard. And while he's there, he is learning how to become a knight. But first he starts as a page, and he's there for months. And while he's there for months, he is simply blowing the kids out of the water in everything, in athleticism, in horse riding, in wrestling. I mean, he is simply the absolute best up-and-coming talent. Everybody knows who he is. One day, while he's performing his page-like duties in the court of the House of Savoy, he notices a young damsel by the name of Bianca de Montferrat. She was of nobility, but her family was very poor, and he's completely smitten by her. And what happens when you're 13 years old and you're in love? You forget about your responsibilities. So whenever he gets a chance, he starts sneaking out. He no longer wants to wrestle. He no longer wants to horse ride. He no longer wants to compete. He just wants to be with her. And they're completely and madly in love with each other. In one occasion, while they're alone, Bayard literally drops down to his knees, crying, and professes his love for her. Now, Bianca's very moved, but she was much more wise than Bayard. And so she asks him, what in the world is going to come out of this boyish passion of yours? In which Bayard replies,
I am young, but I am animated with a passion for glory as well as yourself. I will make myself famous, and when I have acquired distinction by my exploits, I will return and make you my wife.
Bianca recognizes these feelings. She loves him too, and mournfully says to him,
Alas, we must not entertain such projects. I am without fortune, and you may reasonably pretend to the greatest. In accepting your affections, I destroy your hopes. That I love you, I cannot disguise, but let us subdue the sentiment, for our mutual sakes, to a sincere and tender friendship. This sentiment will bring us no reproaches.
And on top of all this, she tells him, but I'm just a damsel and you're just a page. There's no way that we can get married. We need permission from the people up top, from the House of Savoy. How is anything of this gonna come out? How are people gonna react to what we have together? And Bayard says, don't worry about it, because this very same evening, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna ask for permission for me to marry you. But fate had other plans, because that very same day, Charles I, Duke of Savoy, goes up to his house and tells him, wake up, sonny, we gotta go. And he's like, where are we going? He says, we're gonna go see the king. I've told him all about you. Everybody in this city knows who you are, and I'm gonna take you to him so he can really see what you can do. The next day, they arrive to Lyon and they meet Charles VIII, the king, for his so-called audition. Charles VIII is looking at him ride a horse and he's like, this kid is special. All right, he's 13 years old and he's riding a horse like he's 30. At which point he decides, you know what? I'm gonna put you under the Count of Ligny, under his care. And this is the part where Charles I tells him, I'm sorry, my man, but I've taken you as far as I can take you. Now you gotta go upstairs with the big boys. So you're gonna stay with them, and I'm gonna go back to the city of Carignano to rule where I was. And so he does. At this point, Bayard is now entering the next tier of knighthood and chivalry. He starts winning jousting tournaments and all of these accolades. He's becoming famous all over France. And guess what Charles I, Duke of Savoy, in the little city of Carignano decides to do when he gets back? He decides to marry. And who does he pick to marry? Bianca de Montferrat. Bianca would proceed to have multiple children with Charles I, and Bayard proceeded to gain more military accolades in his campaigns. Until another twist of fate happened, and Charles I dies at the age of 21 of tuberculosis in the year 1490. Bianca now becomes the regent ruler of the city of Carignano until one of her sons is old enough to rule the city. And so she becomes single again. They start talking again and sending each other letters, her and Bayard. And about 2 weeks before he decides to go back to the city of Carignano to pay a little visit, he actually learns that she remarries, and Bayard is completely affected by this news. But at the end of the day, he said that he preferred her happiness over his own. The reason she chose to do this was leave it up to the author, who elegantly and beautifully put it into words and said,
"The letters of Bayard renewed his assurances, but she might well be thought to regard them only as the becoming expressions of an honorable man, heedful only of his word, when perhaps the heart of the writer might gladly avail itself to the privilege of escape. She could easily be persuaded to believe that the natural progress of his years and feelings, from those of boyhood to maturity, the excitements of life which he led, and provocations of war and new companions, were in all probability quite enough to render weak the influence of the juvenile flame which she had inspired. These united were considerations of force sufficient to cause her to yield to the persuasions of another."
Bayard arrives to the city of Carignano in the castle, and he's greeted warmly by her and her husband, and they have some time alone, and they're talking and reminiscing about the past, their time as kids, about Charles I, Duke of Savoy, and this was all under the permission of her current husband. These were the laws of chivalry back then. They would allow you to do things like this, of the innocence which nobody would ever question. So after some time, they're talking. Bianca asks Bayard for a favor. Bayard asks, "What would you like?" And she says, "I would like you to arrange a jousting tournament for the people of Carignano who saw you grow up, so they can see your military prowess again." Bayard is thinking, and he finally says, "Very well, I will do so, but I only want my lady to give me something in return." And she says, "What would you like?" And he says, "Well, I would like you to give me a token, a favor, a piece of garment that you have, like a little blouse." She cheerfully hands him the token, and the next day the tournaments begin, and it's a giant success. Everybody in the city of Carignano is there, and Bianca and her husband are in the grandstand side. Bayard wins the tournament, and when it's time for him to receive the reward, Bianca hands him a ruby, but he rejects it, and he says the only reason that he won was because he had the token of his sleeve right on his armor, and because he fought with such courageousness, the only reason he won was literally because of all the love that he had for her, because it's all in that sleeve, okay? Now, keep in mind, the husband is literally right next to her as he says this publicly in front of everybody, and instead of him becoming insecure, he actually becomes flattered. Bianca stands up on the grandstand side to address everyone about this, and she says,
"Since the Lord of Bayard ascribes to my sleeve the merits of his victory, I will keep it myself and wear it all my life for his sake. With regard to the ruby, since he will not accept it, I give it to the Lord of Mondragon, who, after him, is thought to have done the best."
The public cheerfully approves of this decision, and they all start dancing till the end of midnight. Finally, the next day, when it's time for them to part ways, they were both very reluctant to do so. Bayard looks at her deeply and says to her that the joy that he would feel if he would ever become useful in her cause, and that there was no other prince or princess that he would be more devoted to other than his own sovereign, to protect her at any moment's notice. She thanked him for these expressions and those words of admiration. He was greatly moved, her tears were freely shed, and they parted ways. They always kept in touch with each other. Not a year went by when they were not sending each other letters or gifts, always keeping in touch. Very, very innocent, but they already knew that their hearts were with them for a very long time. It is perhaps this very reason why Bayard never married, because his heart was given away a long time ago. It's funny how they had very limited means of communications back then, and they always kept in touch. Meanwhile, in today's day, we have more than enough means to stay in touch with our loved ones, yet we do exactly the opposite. Bianca would die in 1519 on March 30th, leaving behind 5 kids, but none of them would make it past the age of 12, making her bloodline extinct. I said it would be a love story. I never said it was going to end with sunshine and rainbows. If you enjoyed this story, share it with your friends. I have a couple more videos coming up leading up to the date. Don't forget to save the date and save the bottle.